Hello everyone. All right, so the next program in chapter 6 is a game of 21. All right. Well, this program is a bit not clear to me, so I'll do it based on how I understand it. All right. It's not. It's clear, but it's not 100% the way I was expecting it to be. Anyway, we'll do it based on how I understand it, and for the most part, we'll have we'll have we'll have a good understanding of the general requirements, and then we'll do it. And if there are any modifications, we can add it yourselves, or something like that. All right. So now, for this assignment, you will write a program that lets the user play against the computer in a variation of the popular blackjack card game. In this variation of the game, two six-sided dice are used instead of cards. The dice are rolled, and the player tries to beat the computer's hidden total without going over 21. Here are some suggestions for the game's design. Each round of the game is performed as an iteration of a loop that repeats as long as the player agrees to roll the dice, and the player's total does not exceed 21. At the beginning of each round, the program will ask the user whether or not he or she wants to roll the dice to accumulate points. During each round, the program simulates the rolling of two six-sided dice. It rolls the dice first for the computer, and then it asks the user whether he or she wants to roll. Use the die class that was shown in code listing 6-14 to simulate the dice. The loop keeps running total. The loop keeps a running total of both the computer's and the user's point. The computer's total should remain hidden until the loop has finished. After the loop has finished, the computer's total is revealed, and the player with the most points without going over 21 wins. Okay, so I have never heard of this game in my entire life, a game of 21. Right, this is my first time hearing of this game. So, like I said, it's not really clear, but I think I have an idea. So we'll code this based on how I understand it. All right, so from what I understand, first of all, I know we will need a die class. Okay, a die class that's going to be used to generate or to roll a die. And then, even though the program didn't say we should create a player class, we're going to go ahead and create a player class to basically create players. In this case, it's going to be the computer versus the user, right? So we need a player class to be able to create an object from it. And then we'll have our main program, our main application. So let's start with the die class. And if you read the book, somewhere in chapter 6, it actually explained how the die class. It's a variation of how a die class works. So if you already have that, you can use that. I'll create it, so we'll see how it looks like, right? And then for the player class, we'll create that also. So let's start with the die class. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and create a public class. I'm going to call this die. And it's public because I want this class to be available to code outside of this class. Any code that is different from this class can use this because it's public. It's available to the public. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and declare some fields in the die class. And the fields, the first field is going to be the number of sides of each die, right? The number of sides of the die, right? If I'm generating a die or I'm rolling a die, I want to know the number of sides of it. If it's six-sided, that means it has, when you have a die and it has 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots. What's the maximum? Pretty much is how many sides it has the die, right? So I'm going to create a private int, and I'm going to call it number of sides. Now it's private because again, I didn't say anything about it. It's private because I don't want any code outside of this class to be able to directly see the content of this field or change the content of this field number of sides. I want them to be able to use the public methods, which will probably, I don't think we'll define it here, but I want them to use other means to be able to see the content of this field number of sides. And I want them to use other means to be able to change the content of this field number of sides. That's why I'm making it private. As a matter of fact, I'll make all the fields private. Okay, we are hiding the data. All right, so the second field I'm going to create in this die class is going to be the value of the die. When I roll the die, what number what number did it fall on? what number, for example, if I roll a die, is it, did it fall on 4 or 3 or 2? I want to know the value of that. So I'm going to create a private int field also, and I'm going to call it die value, like this. All right. So in this class, I'm going to create a method called an instance method called roll. Okay, which one called will basically simulate rolling a dice, right? We're going to use a random class to be able to generate a random number based on the number of sides of the die, right? So once we call the roll method, it's pretty much like rolling the die. Okay. All right. So since we are going to be using the random class, let's go ahead and import it. So I'm going to go ahead and import java.util.random. I'm importing the random class located in the java.util package. All right. So like I said, we're going to go ahead and create a roll method, a method called roll. It's going to be an instance method. Instance methods don't have the keyword static. All right. Any method that works directly on the fields of an object created from this class is an instance method. And an instance methods, they don't go with the keyword static, right? It works just like a regular method, but they don't have the keyword static. For now, just know that once we learn, once we move on to further chapters, like we will discuss more about that. But for now, just know that instance methods don't have the keyword static. So I'm going to create a public method. I need to specify the return type. Now, when I call this roll method, all it's doing is it's setting the value of the die, whether it's 3 or 4. It's setting the value of it. So it's not really returning anything, right? So because it's not returning anything, I'm setting the return type to void. So public void, and I'm going to call this method roll, right? It's not going to accept any arguments, so I'm not going to define any parameters, because all it's doing is it's going to generate a random number and then set the value of the die, basically to that number. It's setting the value of the die to that number. All right, so we have a random class here. We need to go ahead and create a random object to be able to use it to generate a random number, right? So I'm creating a random class type variable, or basically a random object. I'm going to go ahead and call it random, right? So this is a variable reserved for a random object. Now I'm creating a random object in memory here, and using the equal sign, I'm assigning the memory address of the random object to random. So now this random class type variable or reference variable or random, you can think of it as an object, right? It's not the object itself, but it's a variable, a class type variable that's referencing the random object here. Now I can use it to generate random numbers. So I can say that random.next next int. Well, before that, I made this int because it's the number of sides, right? It's either 1, 2, 3, 4. It's an integer. That's why I made an int. The die value is also going to be a random. Sorry, it's going to be an integer because the sides, the numbers on the die they're integers. It's either 1, 2, 3, or 4. So that's why the die value is going to be that. It's going to be an integer. Now I'm calling the random.nextInt method, which is basically going to generate a random number from 0 to basically the size of an integer, right? But I want to restrict it to random numbers from, let's say, from one, basically random numbers, numbers that are on the die. So if the size of the die is, let's say, 5 or 6, let's use 6 because that's common. Then I want a random number in the range of 1 to 6, right? So basically we are going to use we're going to generate a random number based on the number of sides. So if I type in here the number of sides, it's generating a random number from 0 to the number of sides minus 1, because if I type in, let's say, this 5 or let's say 6, this is not generating a random number from 1 to 6. It's generating a random number from 0 to 5. It's always one less than what you type it in there. That's how random objects work. So in order to generate, right now this is generating a random number from 0 to 5. In order to generate a random number from 1 to 6, I'm going to go, 1 to 6, I'm going to go ahead and shift it one level. So in other words, at first, let's delete this. At first I had, now this statement as it stands is going to generate a random number from 0 to 5, right? So if I shift it one level, I'm shifting the whole range from one level. So 0 moves to 1 and then 5 moves to 6. I'm now creating a random object a random number from 1 to 6 if I shifted one level up. So it's not enough. Assuming if number of sites was holding 6, right, and I just put in the variable number of sites here, it would generate a random number from 0 to 5. I need to go ahead and shift it plus 1, okay, to generate basically the numbers on the die. And once I have that random number is going to be one of the numbers on the die. I want to go ahead and store it in the die value. Anytime someone calls this roll method, it generates a random number and sets it to the die value. So that's basically the number that was rolled, right? So now we are done with the roll method. Okay, the roll instance method. We are done with it. Now let's work on the constructor of this class. Okay, now the constructor is also just like a regular method. It doesn't have the keyword static, and it doesn't have a return type. It doesn't have a return type because we do not explicitly call this method ourselves. This method is called anytime someone tries to create an object from this class, and because we do not call it ourselves, it can't return a value, and that's why we don't specify a return type. It also doesn't have the keyword static. So I'm going to go ahead and create a public, no return type, no keyword static. It's just public and then the name of the constructor. Now the name of the constructor has to be the same as the name of the class. In this case, the name of the class is die, so the name of the constructor is going to be die, just like a regular method apart from that. Now anytime that someone tries to create an object from this class, right, we want to go ahead and define this die class to basically accept the number of sites. So we have to go ahead and define a parameter for that. I'm going to define a parameter for it. It's going to be an int, and I'm going to call it number of sites given, because that's going to be the number of sites that's going to be passed in as an argument by whoever calls this or whoever uses this constructor. All right, so once someone wants to create an object from this class, we require the person to also provide the number of sites they want the die to have. So once they give us the number of sites, or basically once they pass in the number of sites as an argument anytime they call this constructor, we want to set the die value of this class, or of that particular object, okay, to the number of sites given. And then once we have the number of sites, we can go ahead and call the roll method that we just defined. And that's going to generate a random number based on the number of sites. Remember, it generates a random number based on the number of sites, and then sets the die value of that particular object to whatever that random number was. All right. Okay. I think we are good for now. Normally, you'd create accessors and then mutators, or basically getters and then setters. We don't need it for now. This is all we need for now for the die class. Okay. Once we need more things, more methods or accessors or mutators, we'll come and define it. So let's save this, and I'm going to save it in the folder chapter 6. I'll create a new folder. I'll call it, what's this called? A game of 21, right? So a game of 21, and I'll save this also as well. Let's see. Yeah, that's just the folder name. So I'm now saving the class, right? So it has to be the same as the name. The file name has to be the same as the name of the class, right? So die.java, I'm saving it over here, and when I compile this, we don't have any errors, so we're fine. Now let's go ahead and create the player class, which is going to use this this class. As long as I save the player class in the same location as this die class, they should be able to locate each other and use each other. But if I save it in a different location, I would have to import that location or tell whatever program, for example, if this die if the player class I'm about to create is going to use this die class and the die class is saved somewhere else, I need to tell the player class where the die class is. But as long as I save it in the same folder, they will find each other when I try to use each other, right? I hope you understand. All right, so I'm going to create a new file and create another class, which is going to be the player class. So public class, I'll call this player. And player, let's also define some fields. So I'm going to define a private field, and I'm going to call it die1 value. Oops, sorry. It's going to be. Let's see over here what I did. Yeah. Okay. I specify the type. Over here, I need to specify the type. It's going to be a private int because the value is going to be an integer. And then I'm going to also define a private int for die2 value, because when you look at the question, let me just go ahead and copy this question also here on this page. When you look at the question, it says that in this variation of the game, 2 6-sided dice. Okay, 2 6-sided dice are used instead of cards. So we know that there are 2 6-sided dice, and each player is going to basically roll 2 6-sided dice, right? So let's define fields for the player, right? So they can have, you know, those values, right? Oh, yeah, those values. So they'll have these fields, and I'm going to create a method in this player class to basically, I'm going to call this method roll dice, because they are rolling 2 dice. Okay, they're not rolling only 1. Now the die class, when you call it, it only rolls one die, right? Now over here, I've defined 2 fields, right? And I want to know once they roll the 2 dice, I want to know the value for each die. So I'm going to create an instance method. Remember, instance methods don't have the keyword static, so it's going to be a public, because I want this method to be available to the public. I want this method to be available to code that is different from this class, or code that is outside from this class. So public, and I need to specify the return type. This method, when I call it, all it's going to do is going to set the values of the die1 and die2 of that particular player. So it's not really going to have a return type. So I'm going to specify it as void. So I'm going to have a return type. So public void, and I'm going to call this method roll dice, right? Roll dice. Oops. Oh, I didn't terminate this, so it didn't indent properly. Okay. So roll dice. Let's see, it's not going to accept any argument, so I'm not going to go ahead and define any parameters. What this method is going to do is it's going to, like I said, generate values for die1 and die2. I'm going to use a die class, and I'm going to create object, okay, and use them to generate values for die1 and die2. So I'll create a die class type variable. I'm going to call it die1. Okay, and I'm going to create a new die in memory. Now remember, the new die, anytime we're creating an object from the die class, the constructor requires a number of sides. The question said 2 6-sided dice, so we know the number of sides is 6, right? We know the number of sides is 6, so I'm specifying the number of sides here as 6. So basically, I've created a die with 6 sides. I'm going to go ahead and create another die, call it die2, also with 6 sides. And then now I want to use these dice to generate, basically, I'm going to roll these dice, basically. I'm going to roll them. So let's see here. Let's see how I'm going to do this. Let me just go to check something here in the die class. All right, we will need an accessor in this die class, okay, just so we know the value once we roll the dice, just so we know the value of that die. So I'm going to go ahead and create an accessor, okay, which is also an instance method. So it doesn't have the keyword static. It's going to look something like this, without the static keyword, so that we can get the value of the die once it's rolled. So I'm going to create a public method. This method is basically going to return to us the value of the die. So the return type is going to be an integer because the die value is an integer. So I'm going to set the return type to as an int, public int, and I'm going to call this get. Let's see, I'll call it get die value. And get die value is basically it's not going to accept any arguments, so I'm not going to define any parameters. Get die value is going to get the die value of that particular object, right? So I'm going to return the die value of that particular object once I call this get die value method. All right, so save that, go back to the player class, and I'm going to use the die object, die1 dot roll. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to use it. I'm going to call the roll method in the die class to generate a to generate, or basically to roll the die, to roll this die. Once this roll dice in the player class is called, we are generating two die objects, rolling the first die, rolling, well, this is called die one, rolling the first die, rolling the second die like this. And we are using the instance method gets die value to assign the values to die one value, die two value in the player class, right? So over here, we are using the instance method get die value. All right, so I'm going to say die one. Let's see. Yeah, die one dot get die value, and we know that's going to return the die value, right? So once it's returned, we want to store it in die one value of the player class. So let's do that. Store it in the die one value of the player class, and then let's do the same thing for die two value. Use die two to get, we are getting the die value of die two because we've rolled it. We want to get the value of it, and we want to store it in die two value of the player class. So that's what the roll dice is going to do when it's called called from the player class. Generate two die objects, roll them, and then get the value, and store them in die one and die two value. Now in the player class over here, so in the question it says, each round of the game is performed as an iteration of the loop that repeats as long as the player agrees to roll the dice. Okay, so that's not really what I'm looking for. At the beginning of each round, the program will ask the user whether or not he or she wants to roll the dice. All right, let's see. All right, so over here it says the loop keeps a running total of both the computer's and the user's points. Okay, the computer's total should remain hidden until the loop finishes. After the loop has finished, the computer's total is revealed, and the player with the most points without going over 21 wins. All right, so once so basically, let's see. I want to be able to keep track of the first die and the second die added together, right? After they are both rolled, I want to keep track of it. In this question, we're going to use a loop to, roll in one session, in one certain session, one game. The computer is going to roll several times. The player, it's possible he's going to roll. It's possible he or she is going to roll several times, right? So we want to be able to keep track of both die one and die two. Like we want to be able to keep track of the sum of die one and die two, right? Because that's what the game is about. The game is going to allow the computer to roll both dice, right? And the value is going to, be hidden. So let's say the computer rolls 3 and 3. The computer's value is now 6, and then it's going to allow the user to also roll two dice. So the user also rolls, let's say 4 and 4. So the user has 8. Now, if the user chooses to end the game, the user will be the winner because he or she has 8 and the computer has 6. Because the user has more than the computer without exceeding 21, he or she wins. Right, but if they go over 21, then I think the other player wins. So we have to keep track of die 1 plus die 2 as they are being rolled. So I'm going to create another field in this player class, and I'm going to call it. It's also going to be a private int field, and I'm going to call it total die value. Okay. And I'm going to create an accessor in this class to basically get the let's see. yeah, to basically get the value of the total die value, right? So one more thing in this method here. Once we generate the two objects, once we roll them and we get the value, well, let's see. Yeah, once we get the value, let's also set the total die value to be equal to die 1. So initially, so we are going to go ahead and create a constructor, right? When we create a constructor, we are going to set the total die value to be 0. So anytime a die is being rolled in the player class, once we've generated the die 1 and die 2 value, let's add it up. Let's add both die 1 and die 2 together, and then add it up to the total of die value, and hold it there. It's going to be an accumulator, right? If the value is 0, then then we're going to add the value of total of die 1 value to the value of die 2 value, and then add the total to total die value every time. So this is what I mean. Once we've generated the values for die 1 and die 2, total die value plus equals, okay, I'll just say total die value is equal to total die value, what's already stored in total die value. Okay, total die value is equal to what's already stored in total die value, plus, I'm going to put this in parentheses, plus die 1 value, okay, plus die 2 value. So what we're doing over here is, we are saying add to what's already stored in total value the sum of die 1 and die 2 after it's rolled. Each time it's rolled, just add the sum of die 1 and die 2 to total die value. So this is the variable we are using to keep track of the total die value as they're being rolled. In the question, we are going to use a loop to simulate a game. The computer plays, the user plays, the computer plays, the user plays. The computer quits when he or she doesn't want to accumulate more points, because they'll be afraid to exceed 21, right?